Hi, Mark Gilbert here. Thanks for clicking in. Today's topic is transcending polarization. Like all our videos here, they're designed to give you tools and ideas for assisting with our spiritual evolution. I hope you benefit from the video here, and if you do, I'd love it if you'd hit that subscribe button down there. It helps YouTube know that you like the videos we're making. You know, we hear a lot of talk these days about polarization, especially political polarization. Seems to be a major concern here in the United States in the 21st century, but it's also an issue all around the world. It seems like people have dug their heels on either ends of the spectrum of a political issue and are not willing to compromise or find any kind of common ground to move forward on issues. Hence, we get stuck with things that seem to not have any kind of solution to bring forward on it, simply because the other side won't give in an inch. And, you know, we've always had a degree of polarization, but it's probably not been as a difficult challenge as it has been in recent years. There's always been people who took the far ends of a spectrum of an issue, but most folks tend to hang out in the middle. Most folks tended to say, well, this is not as big a concern to me as other issues, and they found ways to compromise on certain things so as to maybe get something on another area. But these days, people find it hard to compromise. In fact, that's often become a dirty word for a lot of people, a sign of weakness, if we would give in over here in order to get this over there. And what happens is that nothing seems to get solved. You know, we can point to a lot of issues as to why this tends to be the case in modern times. We can look at the fact that through time there's been a degree of gerrymandering of our political districts such that the candidates who get elected are very rarely running against any strong challengers. The districts are either Republican or they're Democrat, and there's nobody that's going to come forward to challenge them. The so-called purple districts and purple states are becoming fewer and fewer, it seems, and hence most people feel that they're fairly secure in their positions and in their roles in Congress and so forth. And to that degree, then the real debate then becomes on when they go into the primaries for that particular party. Hence, there's been a higher degree of power among the fringe people in each of the parties that want to drive the decisions and the people who are the political people who are winning these districts to be more towards the end of the spectrum. So where we tended to have more political moderates who would get elected, now we have these people who are a little more on either end of the spectrum who are representative of particular districts where there's no real challenger for the other party. That said, we also have the rise of cable news and the news outlets that give a political perspective on the news, and people segregate themselves into watching and listening the things that agree with the positions they've already got on certain issues. Hence, we tend to find ourselves living in information bubbles and surrounding ourselves both with people and media that believe and act and think like we do. That's also, we see this in social media, and the social media that tends to reinforce our particular beliefs. All of this has contributed to people, all of us sort of moving along the spectrum where we now, instead of having a big bump of people in the middle of the spectrum, there's like two bumps on either end. And the question then becomes, how do we move people back to the middle to seeing the greater good for everybody? How can we transcend this polarization that we're occurring and experiencing right now and move to something that's greater and higher for us as people? If we're truly going to solve the issues that are occurring around us these days in the 21st century, we need to find some degree and some manner to transcend polarization. Recently, I did a video entitled Spiritual Politics, where I suggested that when we're looking at political situations, if we want to put on a spiritual lens, then it calls us to ask certain questions and see things in a certain way. And in my belief, the way that we're going to really truly transcend the polarization we're experiencing now is to move to a degree of reframing how we're looking at the issue. To a degree, I think we all need to put on a spiritual lens like I described in that other video. The title is on the screen, by the way. If we are called to moving to that way of seeing life, seeing these political challenges that we're faced with through a spiritual lens, it ends up having us ask several questions about the situation. The first question that we ask in all political challenges from a spiritual perspective is, how does this situation reinforce and remind us of the interconnectedness of everything? That's question number one. And when we do that, we begin to realize and see that all of the things that are going on around us, and we can look at the issues regarding the media and the gerrymandering and the elections that are not very competitive. All of that has been an interconnected aspect of our society, that every little thing sort of ties to one another. And through that, we begin to see that interconnectedness of all of our social systems. So that's the first question, is to find the situation's message for us in terms of how it reminds us of how things are interconnected. And that shifts our perspective, and we start recognizing that there is this overall interconnectedness of all that is, and that our political circumstances are simply reminding us of that. The second question that we would come to ask in such situations is, what lesson are we called to learn through this? Is there something that we as human beings, spiritual beings, that are having this human experience right now, is there something that we are called to learn and know and grow through based on the circumstances of this particular situation? I'd ask you to contemplate that particular question. What lessons are we going to learn, or should we learn, through the particular high degree of polarization we're experiencing right now? But I know that when I've contemplated that question, what's come up for me is that we are going through this experience right now as an opportunity for us to recognize that this is less than what we want, that we as human beings are recognizing that we are truly interconnected, yet on the one hand, we're focusing on our differences rather than our commonalities. So this is really a clarion call for us to shift our perspective and to see ourselves as connected rather than apart from one another. This is an opportunity for us to remember the truth of our oneness rather than focusing on how we're different. You know, one of the spiritual teachers that's been influential on me is the Abraham Hicks material. And in that, they like to talk about the fact that our human experiences of contrast give us messages for our personal growth. That is, when we go through things that are different from what we want to experience, that contrast between the world that we know is possible and the experiences that we're commonly are going through in this particular moment, the contrast between those, or the gap between those, is the area where we're called to learn and grow. So in the circumstances right now, we can look out at life and recognize this polarization is tearing us apart. It's causing us to focus on differences rather than commonalities. It's causing us to dislike the other, to define other people as the other and see them as something to be disliked, despised, etc. The focus on nationalism, the focus on racism, the focus on the breakdown of seeing ourselves as a one human species and instead focusing on our groups and differences is something that I know most of us feel a call to transcend. And so the lesson that I believe that we're called to learn in this moment of polarization is the call to narrow that gap, to transcend the polarization by seeing our unity, seeing our commonality. And I think that's what we're called to in this particular moment. To a degree, just like in our private lives when we have to go through challenges or dark nights of the soul in order to have the breakthrough that is going to allow us to transcend it, I think we as humanity are also going through a type of dark night of the soul where this high degree of polarization and hate and racism and nationalism that we're currently experiencing is really a part of that breakdown that's moving us to the breakthrough. So after we've looked at the lessons that we feel that we're called to learn based on the current circumstance, the third question the spiritual political perspective asks us to consider is, what steps are we called to take to transcend this challenge? What is next for us to do? as these spiritual beings in this human moment. So I'd invite you to ask the question yourself, what are the steps you think we should take to transcend the issues that are currently facing us regarding polarization? But when I ask myself that question, the following things come up for me. The first one is to have a state of awareness, to be aware of the forces that I was talking about a few minutes ago, the gerrymandering and the non-competitive districts and the media, both the cable news and social media and things of that nature that have led us into this state of shifting ourselves into these individual camps. Be aware of that. And I say be aware of it, not to dwell on it and blame it. Because, we can stay there and say, look at all the problems that are occurring and focus on the blame. And what we then do is give so much energy and attention to the negativity that we see out in the world that we tend to grow more of it. What we resist persists, and what we focus on is what we tend to get more of. And so if we stay in the area of dwelling on the negativity and the divisiveness, then we're going to see more of it. But we do need to be aware of it. We need to be aware of it to gain that contrast that I was talking about a moment ago, to know that there is a higher way, there's a better path, there's a way that we can move to seeing ourselves as one and have more in common than we do have in differences. And if we can look at that gap between where we know we can be in terms of recognizing our sense of interconnectedness to where we are now in high degrees of polarization, that simply looking at that gap gives us the area to focus on, where we know we need to grow. And so that brings us then to what can we do that will actually move us to that place of where we are coming back together, where we're lessening the degree of polarization. Well, one of the things that we can do is to begin to take the other's perspective, to look at another person's life and recognize that, if I'd lived their life and gone through their experiences, I might believe like they had, like they believe as well. Do whatever we can do that puts ourselves in a position that we can see their lives and their position, not as something we necessarily need to agree with or to condone if they're doing anything harmful, but to understand that people get to their positions not through a degree of illogical circumstances, that there was a high degree of logic of their life that led them to that role. And if we can emotionally and mentally walk a mile in their shoes in our minds, that will put us into a perspective that we can at least see that other people can have different opinions from ourselves. The next thing is to try to focus on our commonalities, because when we transcend the differences and we look at where we're alike, what we find is that we have so much more in common than we don't. We all want the same things in life, i.e. security, love, a sense of self-purpose and growth, to have a degree of material comfort, to be able to share our talents and gifts with the world. When we focus on the things that we have alike, then we recognize that alikeness will grow in our minds as well. So that's the next thing. And finally, I would say that one of the key steps that we can take to transcend polarization is to let go of our sense of fear and move to a state of love. Ultimately, all these videos here are about our spiritual evolution. And if you've watched the ones who are immersed in that topic, you know that where I believe that we as humanity are going is back to a state of recognition of our oneness, where the power of love draws us to a sense of interconnectedness with other people. Polarization right now is simply a temporary stage that we are going through. It is a contrast between where we know we can be and where we would like to be versus our current experience. As we transcend this contrast, as we transcend polarization, we'll move to higher stages of love and care and concern for one another. That's where we're ultimately headed, but we may have to go through a little bit of the dark night of the soul to get there. But it's up to you and it's up to me in our individual lives and in our own ways to take the steps that are going to make that shift. I have to ask you, what life would you rather live? What world would you rather be in? Would you rather be in one that focuses on differences and fear, or one that focuses on our common nature and love? The choice is up to you, and it's up to me. So, what are you doing to transcend polarization? If you've got some ideas or tips, be sure to list them in the comment field below the video. And if you've got ideas or suggestions for other videos that you'd like to see me do, be sure to drop me an email. The email address is on the screen right now. Thanks for watching. Till next time. Hey, one more quick thing. I'd love it if you subscribe to the channel. The link is down there on the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. Also, there's a related video you might want to watch. It's right next to my face. And if you like this video, be sure to click like and leave me a comment on YouTube. Thanks.